It's nice to be in this space. I can remember back in the 80s, before the building was redone, we had a number of lecture series here, and it was one of our favorite spaces for dialogue, history, and women's studies. We were introducing, at that time, I was chair of the Department of African American and African Studies, and I can remember introducing the first course on Black women in the United States, and we filled this hall all semester with guest speakers focused on the Black woman's experience. We had a big grant from humanities grant for that project. So it's good to be back in this room, and especially on this occasion. Thank you, Jan, for the introduction, and you took me back to my undergraduate years in Baltimore, and Councilwoman Crump mentioned how they fired up Detroit. Well, we fired up Baltimore as well. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this program honoring the 50th anniversary of the liberation of Conklin Hall. I, too, salute BOSS and the BOSS alumni this evening, and I'm honored to share the program with Chancellor Cantor, with Professor Michael Nash. Michael and Ed are my former students, so it's especially warm to share the panel with them. Tonight's panelists, who are part of the Rutgers family, and as I mentioned the Rutgers family, I would ask us just to pause for a brief moment to remember Sandra West, who passed away just a week ago. Sandra was an integral part of the Rutgers family. She taught in the English department. We had off-campus friendships when she was at the Newark Library. Her special programs were a jewel in this city, and she was also a theater buff like myself. We did a lot of theater together. Remarkable woman. The former members of BOSS, we call them liberators of Conklin Hall, are the real center of attention on this program, and I will serve as a mere moderator. They are the genuine heroes here, whose bold voices and activism in the winter of 1969 helped to reshape Rutgers into the welcoming institution of inclusion that we are now so proud of. Please let's start off by giving them a big, big round of applause. Here, here. I won't be long-winded. Jan has told me to be very, very brief. It's the liberators that we want to hear from and not a long-winded historian. I will formally introduce the panelists one by one after a few brief reflections, and I have been asked, as I said, to keep those reflections very short to allow maximum opportunity to the panelists. As historian, I would just like to remind us in a few words of both the wider and local contexts that were a part of the background to the student takeover of Conklin Hall on February 24th, 1969. That year, and the few years which had come before it, were a part of what has come to be known as a turbulent decade. Student protests across the nation invigorated American politics and challenged the existing structural frameworks of power, including government, corporations, and yes, universities. The last years of the 1960s were years of the Vietnam War, urban rebellions in our cities, from Los Angeles to New York and Washington, Philadelphia, Detroit, Baltimore, Chicago, and yes, Newark in the summer of 1967. And of course, the assassinations of Dr. King and of Malcolm on this day in 1965, and Bobby Kennedy. These were the years of an assertive Black arts movement, years of renaming from Negro to Black, and years of Pan-African identity. More Blacks in a number of cities were building a process of winning their place in electoral politics. Voter education and voter registration projects were being developed, and races for mayor and city council, boards of education, and judges were being carefully planned and implemented. As many of us remember, and I must speed it up, from direct experience, college and university campuses were sites mobilized to a new politics of resistance. Along with the transformative events here at Rutgers-Newark, we remember what happened at Columbia, at Howard University, at Cornell, at Berkeley, and my dear alma mater, Morgan, and scores of other campuses. Black students were often in the forefront of campus protest activism 50 years ago. It is important to note as well that black students organizing protest and demanding change did not do so haphazardly. Many of them with knowledge of strategies and tactics bequeathed to them in part from the civil rights movement were very savvy, well-read, and well-informed about the importance of careful planning and step-by-step execution of protests for change. As Rutgers-Newark marks its successes, recognizes its challenges, and continues to grow in its mission to ensure inclusion and diversity that were not here during our panelist student days. I'll just say parenthetically, before we walked over from my office in Conklin, we were looking at the Encore from 1969, the yearbook from 1969, and our administrator, Christina, and I were perusing the yearbook, and we've come a mighty long ways. We've got a mighty long ways to go, of course, and the Chancellor so eloquently stated the continuing mission. We value and welcome the understanding that they will no doubt share with us, these panelists. And now I want to introduce them to you. And this is not in order of your speaking, but the order in which they've been listed in the program. Vicki Donelson currently operates an independent consultant for social service programs. After establishing successful programs in Los Angeles and Philadelphia, she duplicated her successes for Newark. She recently retired as the Social Services Director, Homeless Program for the City of Newark Department of Health and Community Wellness. George Hampton has over 30 years of experience in urban planning and development, healthcare policy, and higher education administration. Mr. Hampton retired in 2007 from his positions as Vice President for the Department of Urban and Community Development at the University of Medicine and Dentistry, of course now a part of Rutgers-Newark. Thomas Roberts, who graduated with a BA from Rutgers-Newark in 1977.
No, that was Seton Hall Law School.
Okay. And Seton Hall Law School in 77? Yes. Presently serves as General Counsel to Neighborhood Housing Services of Camden Incorporated in the state of New Jersey and does some work for the Palm Beach County School District. Claude Singleton, who received his BA in 1978 in economics. After 38 years of service to the state of New Jersey, Claude retired in April 2012 from his position as Bureau Chief of the Medical Assistance and Health Services. I'm abbreviating the blurbs. I think you find them in the documents circulated in the program. Harrison Snell graduated from Rutgers in 1970. He received his MS at New York University in Real Estate Development and Finance, and his law degree from Rutgers Law School in 1973. A solo practitioner, he has practiced law for many years as a member of the State Bar Associations of New Jersey, New York, Washington, and Washington, D.C. He is past president of BOSS, and he was president of BOSS during the time of the takeover. So we'll continue now with questions for the panelists. Now, I'll note very swiftly that these questions, which number 20, and we probably will not get through all of them given the time, have been generated by a number of our students in various classes, by the BOSS Alumni Association, by BOSS itself, and we'll commence. I'm going to sit at level with my colleagues. The question that we might start off with is a question that does come from one of our students. And it goes like this. What were your impressions of Rutgers-Newark when you arrived on campus, and why did you become active in BOSS as an organization? And
Anybody want to answer? No.
maybe Tom?
Let Vicki answer.
Well,
Well, while she's
Deja vu. First, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm going to be on my best behavior. I'm gonna only correct those things that are monumental. But we should honor the 7 members of the Liberators who are no longer with us,
Yes.
who entered a building without any regard for their, well, we had some regard for it, but by ignoring their personal safety. And those folk, Marvin McGraw, Joe Brown, Arthur Hunt, Bill Wilson is still with us. I have to go this way since I thought somebody would do this. But 7 of them are deceased, and there were 16 people who entered the building, 2 of whom had to leave in the middle of the night because their mama found out. But I'd like to just answer the question so I don't belabor it. In 1967, when I came to Rutgers, it was the year of the rebellion. When I came onto the campus, all the walls were white, all the faculty was white, all the students were white. And sometime during the getaway, they called it freshman camp, I ran into at least one other black person who was part of the kitchen staff cooking at the camp.
Yep.
And then about 2 weeks in, I was walking across the campus and I saw a skinny brown man in a green, they tell you I always remember what people were wearing. It happened to be Richard Roper. And he was the first person that I had seen who was black. It was that stark. And to set the tone for how I hope we will proceed, he told me that there was a meeting of the NAACP, and having come out of the civil rights movement and being newly black nationalist, of course I went to the meeting with the intent that, no, we're not going to do this. We're going to do something a little bit more militant. But that was the beginning. And I'd like to say that on the first moment that I entered a classroom was English comp. And at Rutgers, we were already scared because we don't teach grammar at Rutgers. And the attrition rate was a mortality rate. It was just, for English composition was like 65% for everybody. Forget about being black. But I went into a classroom, English comp at 8:40, and the instructor seeing me said, how many of you know Shakespeare? We don't teach grammar. There's a little blue book. If you have any questions about grammar, just consult the blue book. So Mr. Collins, I think his name was, said, how many of you read Shakespeare? So everybody's hand goes up. I'm from a small southern town in Florida who had been very active in the civil rights movement in the most difficult situations. So everybody's hand goes up. Midsummer Night's Dream. Everybody read Macbeth. Everybody, and so after a while, there was only one hand going up. And he said, how do you know so much about Shakespeare? So I said, well, in my high school, a little black school in Florida, in order to graduate, we had to do a senior thesis. And mine was just happened to be how Shakespeare develops character. So I read 23 works in order to write the paper. And then he said, well, what about grammar? So, not many people can tell you what a dangling participial is or, an infinitive is. And so I won the battle, but more than letting him know that I was going to be here, it told me that I could do this. My mother said to me when I came to Rutgers, your job is school. She died with my bail money in her wallet. But as long as you do school, I got your back. So Rutgers to me was affirming because I chose Rutgers because it was one of the best universities in the country. It helped that my mother was a resident of New Jersey and the tuition was cheap and she could just write the check. But these folk were the first people that I saw at that NAACP meeting. And we remained friends for 50 years despite political differences and all of that.
That's right.
So to answer your question, that's how Rutgers was to me.
Okay.
I just want to say
Go
one
ahead,
thing.
Tom.
It's-
Tom?
Just in general, it was not just us. Luckily, we're honored to be up here, okay? Some of us were in the building. Vicki, she had more guts. We stayed outside. But we actually faced a lot more interesting in things. But there are people in this audience who were with us.
That's right.
And they're not up here, and they need to stand up. Let's
I
go,
agree.
Minnie. Howard.
Many.
Yeah.
Hey, Howard!
Vivian.
Hi!
James.
Check it out!
We were all together. And yeah, Jim Critter. Jimmy, come on. Yeah. Come on, man. And what was exciting about being at Rutgers, as Vicki told you, and Harrison, these were very accomplished students in high school. Very bright, very talented.
Had to
And
be.
some of the things, yeah, you had to be.
To get in.
Oh, to get it? Really?
Yeah.
Why did the professors always ask me what my SATs were? I never understood. He never asked the other students. But what I do see happened, for all this brightness and individuality, these very bright students, when we got together for a cause, subsumed those personalities.
Oh,
So
yeah.
we could make a mark on this university. And I'm very happy that it lasted. We've been brought back here after 50 years. We never assumed that anything like this would be happening to us, to be so honored. And as I was listening, the chancellor, et cetera, they say the liberation of Conklin Hall. No, that was really the liberation of Rutgers University. And it needs to be put in that way. And I remember we were in the student center, and every week there would be another takeover in another university. We said, hey, we've set some examples here. And we were very proud of that. But, and also you got to add a dimension that this was not a residential institution. We went home every night. We did not get to sit together and mash out things. So that was a really a very exciting idea when we look at it through the history view, that people could come together, put these ideas together, make action, and go home. And be effective about that. Putting aside all these personalities, and there were some very strong personalities, because you had to be a strong personality to survive your high schools, get into this university, and deal with some of the institutionalized racism and then just the individual racisms that we would face on a daily basis. Articles in the Observer newspaper calling us animals and things like that. You want to, and we did react to that. Sometimes not gently, but no, it was not gentle. But yeah, it was an exciting time. It was an opportunity to learn, and as people point out, we could not afford, most of us could not afford to go away to college anyhow. I was lucky this was nearby. I could earn my tuition working with my father at a steel plant in my hometown of Jersey City, across the river. I earned my tuition. I never got any scholarships here.
Yeah, me neither.
And no student aid. And then we found out later on that the student aid office had a real problem with supporting non-whites. So, but that's different. But yeah, we saw it as an opportunity for an education that we could afford, and we earned it. And you double that. But we paid for this, and we still worked hard to make it possible for others to enjoy that opportunity, to get the fruits.
And I think George I saw you being enthusiastic and wanting to comment on these first days.
I'm always enthusiastic, ready to comment on everything. But I wanted to just pick up a couple of points that, first off, thanks, Tom, for acknowledging those who are in the audience who were there as well, and there's even others who were assisting us in a variety of ways. But I wanted to pick up on a few things that Vicki Donelson said, because quite frankly, to this very day, and we can get into the details. You probably already know a lot of the details about what the takeover was, but you may liberate. This term liberate freaks me out a little bit. I don't see myself as an honorable person. I was just a student hanging out. But here's the point. Again, we're 19 years old, 18 years old, not what you see up in front of you right now. But the point that Vicki made is so appropriate. The friendships that I made then, this kid right here, I've known since high school. We went to the same high school, Southside High School in Newark, and it was called Southside, not Shabazz. And that's my sister over there, so much older than me, who also went to Southside High School. Vivian King. But the point here is this, and very quickly, the friends that we made then, with some of those friends we are friends 50 plus years later.
50 for me.
Not just 50, but 50 plus years later. And that means a lot. For me, it was so amazing, and I'll just be very quick. I'll try to be as quick as I can. I came to Rutgers behind Bessie Hill. I was at Southside High School, student council president, did all the honor roll stuff back there. And Bessie Hill came there and saw me. She was on a mission looking for young black kids, and had decided in '66, I guess, I graduated '67, so it was Bessie Hill who ultimately made the decision for me to come to Rutgers-Newark. Coming to Rutgers-Newark, it was so apropos. Unlike Vicki, I was not prepared. Now, I got all the great academics at Southside, but when I took 5 credit mathematics courses because, hey, I could do this stuff. Yeah, right. When I took those 4 credit English composition courses, hey, so that first year, that first semester that I was here, Rutgers-Newark, I nearly failed out right away, and that's the truth, okay? Now, I knew I was smart, but I learned very quickly. None of the white kids were smarter than me. They were just more skilled than me. They had already read Shakespeare. No, I had never read Shakespeare. A little bit, but nothing much. So what's the point? The point is that I learned quickly that 2 things. One, it was very important to be around people like Vicki and Rich Roper and some of the others, because I learned I'm just being honest, I learned very quickly about that. That is really, this issue about Pan-Africanism and all that, I picked this up from these kids running around with these square things in their hands. What are those square things? I think it was Vivian. Vivian said, they're called books, George. But the point that I'm simply making is it was the students then who ultimately I learned the most from. It was the students then who are still my friends to this day. When I look at these pictures back here, on one end you see Richard Roper in one corner, and George Hampton in the other corner, Claude, Tom, or this picture right here, and McGill, who's no longer with us, are in the middle. Rich Roper's wife, Marlene is right there at the bottom. I mean, it's a surreal experience. But the point I'm making is it was friendships that brought me through, and it was friendships that, and we've all had, if you know our careers, we were proven to be successful. We were successful people, all of us. So I just wanted to make that out there, and we can answer these questions as we go along.
Yeah. Before we have Harrison chirp in on the same question, perhaps, I had a question about archiving the experience. And I was just wondering, there's an African proverb which says, when one of our elders dies, a library is burnt down. Right. And so I was curious as to whether or not either of you, or perhaps several of you, or perhaps all of you, have written about what happened here at Rutgers-Newark in the winter of 1969, or have you committed your memories in any way in terms of a video or audio record?
The answer is yes, and not enough. More needs to be done. Let me say it that way. But if you saw in this picture here, on the 40th anniversary, we got together and we literally wrote a brochure. That brochure is shown in one of these pictures, and I have my copy of it in the back. But we talked specifically about what we were doing during that period of time. And I'll just be very quick again. The other issue is we created a group, Richard and all of us coming out, Vivian and everybody else, a group called New Jersey Public Policy Research Institute. And for the next, I don't know, I think we started that around 1980 or something like that. Vivian, help me out. When was it? I'm getting old. But anyway, the point is, from...
I don't remember. It was
1975?
Yes.
Sorry, Vicki. I told you, go to Vicki. 1975, and for every year, just about off and on, we would chronicle blacks in New Jersey. So there's a whole series of...
I think some of that can be accessed on the Conklin Hall project online.
Yes.
I guess my question was more in terms of your own self-initiated reflection and individual record keeping, and whether or not you'd be interested in doing more of the oral history of your experience.
I have some, well, I have a lot of stuff, but I'm just waiting for the chancellor to call me to tell me that she's going to let me teach it and write it at the same time at the university.
Yeah. One of the other questions that we have, obviously looking at the panel up here, we've got Vicki as the only woman on the panel, and obviously there were other women involved. And I was, as we look at the history of rights movements and rights projects, the roles of women have sometimes been left out, underplayed, and not mentioned. And I was wondering if anyone wanted to provide any commentary on the contributions and significance of women in the project of liberation of Rutgers University.
Well, my experience is, I think there were probably more male students in the group.
Nope.
But we never...
No.
In boys?
Yeah.
The people who occupied the building were 7 sisters and 7 brothers. 2 brothers left during the night. But
What you did? No, I'm not talking. I thought he was giving a more general.
I'm talking. You were talking about
historical
people who liberated the building. Is what
No,
you're talking
the liberators. Yeah, those were
about. Right. They were.
pretty evenly.
But even in the leadership in the group, we have to really give credit to a lot of those women.
Yeah.
If you look at our
Ivy
demands
Davis,
that were written,
Jen,
it's Vicki. There was
Ivy
people like
Davis.
Lynn Hanson. They were leaders. I mean, they really pushed.
Yeah, well, it's an odd question to me because we always dealt with everybody pretty equally.
Right, but those
Well, it's
women
just-
really came to the fore.
They were always to the fore.
No, they weren't.
Oh,
They weren't.
in that way they were.
So here we go. Here we go.
we did say it was diverse.
I'm the token.
Different opinions.
Oh, please.
I was the token, and it was probably because of all the folk in the building, I was the only one with actual civil rights and civil disobedience history. But women made the takeover possible. Sue Perry worked for Physical Plant. She stole the floor plans. She's too old to go to jail. Statute of limitation has run.
Right, well,
And if she had not done that, even though she did not participate in the takeover,
that's right.
we would not have known the guard schedules. We wouldn't know which doors to close, when they would make their rounds, and how many minutes it would take us to actually occupy the building,
Right.
which ended up being less than 6 minutes.
Right. It was
If Gloria had not been a participant, we would not have known how to manage the switchboard. If Dottie and people who work for the university had not supported us, we would not have had food.
if Bessie Hill.
Bessie Hill had
Board of
not
Governors.
structured the demands. There were 3 sets of demands, since we're talking about the actual takeover. There were 3 sets of demands. When the 3rd set, which we had modified, were rejected, there was a vote by boss members. There was a democratic process that said we would not take drastic measures in response to having the demands not met. So there was a group of folk, not with the permission of boss, not with the support of boss, who took the initiative to do what they thought they needed to do. Women were responsible to a great degree for the success of that. They even bought the chains, people, to lock the doors. But there's a difference between Norm Samuel's revisionist history, where there are some folk who took some actions to control, shut down, now called liberate, a building. And they did that in secrecy. Jan just told me yesterday that Aaron, who was in the building, told her, because that was her guy. But we had no idea who would go and tell anybody about what we were doing.
We weren't even told.
We weren't even told. And in
Because-
fact, the very day of the takeover, if you recall, we all got gathered in one of the classrooms in Conklin Hall, and there were, interestingly enough, more or less 2 sets of people.
Yes.
One who knew what was going on and told us right then and there, listen, within the next, we've decided the demands weren't met. Vicki, you can correct and all that. But we have decided that this is what we're going to do. And there were those who said, okay, then let's do it. And they were willing to stay inside. And there were those like me, and I looked at Claude and James McGill and Tom Roberts, and I said, well, my mom ain't going to let me be inside. But we will go outside and do everything we can to protect that building.
Well, it's clear that the gender question created a lot of buzz on the panel. And
We never
the
were good
debate
at
goes
following
on.
instructions.
But there's one student question from Professor Lyra Montero's class that I'd like to share with the panel. And the question goes something like this: how do you feel about the changes that your actions led to in Rutgers University, especially in Newark? Do you think that the purpose of the takeover was met in its entirety? And that's a student question from Professor Montero's class.
Want a brief answer? Yes. From me.
Claude, I don't think
Vicki?
you've spoken.
Why does everybody...
Harrison, you get
This is not deference, by the way. This is something else.
Yeah.
I really don't know. I mean, I've heard earlier speakers say that pretty much what we were confronted with 50 years ago is being confronted today. So I wouldn't venture to say that hopefully there have been some improvements.
Harrison, why don't you say something, man? Yeah, do it.
Yeah.
Put your sense in it. You're the lawyer.
Harrison?
Looking back 50 years ago from now,
Second president of BOS, right here. Go ahead.
Tom, you would have said. Looking back 50 years ago, our world was quite different than the world I see now. There were changes that were made. There were changes where more black people went to college, we got degrees, but a lot of things remained the same. The poverty, the hostility, the racism, it never ended. It never ended. Listening at the news last night about a Coast Guard cutter who wanted to kill black people. I hear the same attitudes about black people, that they're poor, they're lazy. That's the reason that they're disadvantaged. Things have changed. We've gotten education, we have a little bit of money, but our world hasn't changed that much in 50 years.
Another question comes from our student body, and it centers on monuments, memorials, and architectural recognition. The greatest memorial, obviously, that we could have in terms of what happened in 1969 would be the full carrying out of the agenda. But students ask the question, now when you enter Conklin Hall, there is a plaque, of course, that we all know that recognizes what happened. And we have these programs that memorialize and honor what happened. But the students want to know, should there be more in terms of a physical representation? The renaming of Conklin Hall, for example, comes up in their discourse once again. How do the alumni sitting here feel about whether or not Conklin Hall should perhaps be renamed as Liberation Hall or Conklin? I remember in Professor Clement Price's reflections on the event 40 years afterwards, he noted in his discussion that this was still in the minds of a number of people, both on campus and those who had graduated. So I'm very curious to how alumni feel about this.
Well, I'm a member of RAAA, and similar to the activities that were undertaken in New Brunswick to honor Paul Robeson.
Yes.
I think I was the first Paul Robeson scholar. I don't even think that exists anymore. It's nice to have a physical memorial, but to me, the greatest memorial, consistent with that question that I didn't answer, I'm really, really more than proud to be a graduate of this university. So my relationship is one of love and hate. I love the academic challenges and the stature and the recognition. This is a great university. But at the same time, like you have hate relationships with yourself sometimes, I'd like to see a more substantive representation in the form of an endowed chair, something that says, we appreciate the struggle so much, the liberation so much, that we will undertake to work with BOSS to teach them things that we learned in Race, Poverty, and Protest taught by Bob Kervin. We were his first students. We learned it from Norman Samuels when he taught us how to use the political process and to understand policy. We understood it better then, but we need to be able to teach these students how to organize even an event like this one. We need to teach them how to organize people into a movement. We need to teach them the difference between policy and things. Public policy drives every single thing we do. And when we allow them to let us not teach them, then we all suffer. We need to teach them. We had teachers, Bob Kervin, Gus, Junius Williams. There was a community that embraced us because we embraced it. We brought it with us every day when we came to the university. We didn't leave it at home and say, oh, we're going to college today. So I'd like to see a chair or something like it, Chancellor, a course, some seminars. Hopefully during the course of this year, we'll use the opportunity to teach people how to do stuff. You know, that's what I'd like to see. I'm sorry.
Any other,
I do like the idea, though, in addition.
any other reflections on that question?
Yes, I'm on your question. I do like the idea of perhaps creating some kind of structure. You know, I like statues.
Okay.
I like, foundations. I like buildings. I like infrastructure. And I say that because the beauty of naming things, I'm to this day, for people may not know it, so that maybe they need to know, of course, but that building is called Hill Hall because of Bessie Hill, and it stands through all these years. So I would love to see, if you're interested in a Hampton Hall, would be that's a joke, that's a joke, that's a joke. But the point simply is a boss, whatever, or a foundation. I'm all for that. I think it makes a lot of sense. That was a joke.
Any other reflection? Harrison?
I agree with George that there needs to be some type of structure and commemoration in regards to Conklin Hall. They have something in there now, don't they? They have a plaque or something?
Yes, there is a plaque, yes.
And I saw Norman's plaque on the front of the building.
Was his bigger than ours?
Bigger. I think there needs to be something done in reference to Conklin Hall because it does reflect. I was going over paperwork today about what happened back in February, and this movement evidently what went on in Rutgers-Newark was an impetus for all the Rutgers campus. It led everyone in regards to admission of black students. It was the first. It led the fight in regards to black faculty, in regards to black administration. I looked at the demands, and I remember those demands that you made in regards to Malcolm Talbot, and it was Vicki who wrote it, that they need to get rid of the admissions department, that boss needed to have approval for appointment of black administrators and black faculty members. I remember that. I remember all of that, and it needs to be commemorated.
Yes. Parenthetically, I would like to say, on behalf of the Department of African American and African Studies, which got its start out of the protest and the liberation of Conklin Hall, that we salute you and your comrades in the audience for the work that you did and the meaningfulness of that moment in terms of curriculum change here at Rutgers-Newark. The department, when I arrived here in the early 1980s, had one line. And as a statement of the commitment to diversity that this university has made recently, we now have more faculty who are appointed, either singly or jointly appointed to the Department of African American Studies than there were faculty in the whole Faculty of Arts and Sciences when I arrived. So there is a lot of progress. We still have an agenda for progress and development and adding more people, but we cannot ignore the good that has been done. And so there have been some very good things that have been done in terms of curriculum change and people being added to the faculty. Another question that seems to be on the minds of a number of students is, in your minds, have you reflected on what made the difference between those students who were liberation-minded that February and those who did not support the liberation? It's one of those. Well, not all of the black students were a part of it. So the students are asking, was there some difference in profile in terms of where they came from geographically, perhaps, gender, their courses they had taken, the readings they had been exposed to. You mentioned influential professors and teachers and organizers in the community. So students have been interested in what are the factors that define the difference between those who were participant and those who were not.
Right. You know, but I didn't find anybody that opposed it that were black students or faculty members. Some people went in the building, some people did not, but I
No,
didn't
there was a
find
vote,
anybody
Harrison.
in
There was
opposition.
a vote. There was a vote.
There was a what?
There was a vote. Benny remembers. There was a vote. And I don't want us to bicker, it's just that we recollect history differently. And I'm older, so it could be that it's my faulty recollection. But what happened was, in 1967 and 1968, every time we submitted demands, we had no support on campus in numbers to be able to make any impact. So in the summer of 1968, we went to Central High School, Arts High School. When Rutgers said, I was a member, they made a mistake. They put me on these committees, scholastic standings and admissions. And when I found out what the rules of admissions were, we said, we have to increase our numbers because 15 students can't do anything. So we went and got Minnie, Dorian, Sakina, Bill, Arthur, Melvin, Wanda, and brought them to the admissions department. They were admitted, and by the way, about 75% of them were Phi Beta Kappa by the time they left. And so they were our friends because we had recruited them. And those were largely the people who went into the building.
But they were young, weren't they?
They were all young. I was 19, they were 18.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Basically
But
freshmen.
they weren't different, but we had tools. We knew how to organize. We knew how to identify the problem. The problem was there is strength in numbers. We had no numbers. There was a problem because we couldn't get folk regularly admitted. The public schools were telling students not even to apply to Rutgers because Rutgers is an Ivy League school and you are not in the first 10 deciles and you will not get in.
This is so rich, and we certainly appreciate the sharings that you've done with us, but our time, I've been advised, has ended for this particular segment, and we're going to take a 15-minute break, and then the audience will be able, as I understand it, to ask questions of the panelists. So,
Just one thing, I hope this level of discussion opens the way for maybe a semester-long or a year-long seminar on the whole issue.
I mean, 50 years deserves more than a 2-hour
Yes.
panel discussion and a party.